If you're thinking about retiring overseas, Panama and Portugal can look surprisingly similar from a distance. Both have attracted thousands of foreigners. Both offer residency options for retirees. Both can cost considerably less than many parts of the United States. But once you actually try to build a retirement in either country, the similarities start disappearing fast, because this isn't really a choice between two affordable countries. It's a choice between two completely different versions of retirement. Panama gives you the US dollar, a retirement residency program with an unusually low income requirement, and a tax system that can be extremely favorable to someone living on income from outside Panama. Portugal gives you Europe, strong public infrastructure, access to a national healthcare system, and a lifestyle that has attracted Americans for years. But some of the advantages Portugal became famous for have changed. And one of those changes could make this comparison look very different today than it did just a few years ago. So let's start with the advantage you feel every single month. Panama uses the US dollar as legal tender alongside its Balboa, which is pegged 1-to-1 with the dollar. For an American retiree, that removes one variable immediately. If your pension, Social Security, or retirement withdrawals arrive in dollars, you're not watching the dollar-euro exchange rate every month just to figure out what your income is worth locally. But don't confuse currency stability with Panama being dirt cheap. It isn't everywhere. Current 2026 figures put a typical one-bedroom apartment in central Panama City at around $1,270 a month, with apartments outside the center averaging closer to $900. Move to a retirement destination like Boquete, and the numbers can fall considerably. Current figures put a one-bedroom at roughly $700 outside the center and around $825 in town. Portugal is a different story. Lisbon and some of Portugal's most popular coastal areas have become much more expensive than the Portugal many Americans first heard about years ago. But Portugal changes dramatically once you leave those hotspots. In Coimbra, for example, current figures put a one-bedroom outside the center at roughly €570 a month and around €780 in the center. Braga and other smaller cities can also offer substantially better value than Lisbon. So neither country automatically wins because it's cheap. Where you live inside the country may matter almost as much as which country you choose. But Panama does have one financial advantage Portugal can't duplicate. Your dollar income stays dollar income. In Portugal, your purchasing power moves with the exchange rate. That may sound minor. On a fixed retirement income over 10 or 20 years, it isn't. And money becomes an even bigger part of this comparison when we get to taxes. But first, you have to be allowed to stay. This is where Panama starts showing why it has remained so attractive to retirees. Its Pensionado program requires a qualifying lifetime pension of at least $1,000 per month. For each dependent, add another $250. Social Security can qualify. So can certain government, military, corporate, and other qualifying lifetime pensions. And this isn't simply a temporary tourist workaround. It's a formal residency route specifically built around pensioners. There is paperwork. Documents have to be prepared correctly, and the application itself is handled in Panama through a Panamanian attorney. But the financial threshold is remarkably accessible compared with many residency programs around the world. And Pensionado status comes with something unusual: actual retiree discounts. Depending on the expense, qualifying retirees can receive statutory discounts on things such as entertainment, transportation, hotels, certain medical expenses, and other services. Portugal also has a legitimate route for retirees. It's commonly called the D7, although Portugal officially describes the category as a residence visa for retirees and people living from their own income. Applicants need to demonstrate sufficient means of support and accommodation and provide the required documentation, including proof of pension or other qualifying income, criminal record documentation, and appropriate insurance during the visa process. So Portugal is absolutely still open to American retirees. But here's where an important distinction appears. Panama has built one of its best-known residency programs specifically around being a pensioner. Portugal allows retirees to become residents, but you're entering Portugal's broader immigration, tax, and administrative system. And that distinction becomes much more important once healthcare enters the picture. For a healthy 60-year-old, healthcare overseas can feel like something to worry about later. For a 70-year-old managing several prescriptions or a chronic condition, it can determine where you can realistically retire. Portugal has a major advantage here. Legal residents can access Portugal's national healthcare system, the SNS, subject to the rules governing registration and access. Private healthcare is also widely available, so many foreign residents use some combination of public and private care. Panama works differently. It has public healthcare systems as well as a substantial private medical sector. And Panama City has major private hospitals and specialists. But private health insurance becomes a more individual calculation as you get older. Age matters. Medical history matters. Coverage matters. And private policies can treat pre-existing conditions differently. That doesn't make Panama's healthcare poor. It means you need to plan for it differently. There's also geography. Living in Panama City puts you much closer to the country's deepest pool of specialized private medical care. Living in a mountain retirement community several hours away may give you the climate and lifestyle you want, but specialized treatment can require travel. Portugal's healthcare structure is one reason some retirees will choose it, even if another part of the financial comparison favors Panama. But now we get to the part of this comparison that has changed the most. For years, Portugal was promoted to foreign retirees with an enormous selling point: the non-habitual resident regime, or NHR. At one point, qualifying foreign pension income could receive extremely favorable Portuguese tax treatment. That became part of Portugal's retirement reputation. But if you're researching Portugal today using older YouTube videos, blogs, or retirement articles, there's something you need to know. That version of NHR is gone for new arrivals. Portugal revoked the old regime beginning in 2024, apart from people covered by transitional provisions. Portugal created a newer incentive called IFICI, sometimes described as NHR 2.0. But it isn't simply the old retirement benefit under a new name. It's targeted toward people meeting specific professional and activity requirements, and foreign pension income does not receive the old NHR treatment. That's a major distinction for someone moving to Portugal specifically to retire. A new Portuguese tax resident can generally enter a system that taxes residents on worldwide income. And that means your exact mix of Social Security, pension income, IRA or 401k withdrawals, investments, and other income matters. The US-Portugal tax treaty can also affect which country taxes particular types of income and how double taxation is relieved. This is exactly where generic advice becomes dangerous. Two American retirees living next door to each other in Portugal could have very different tax outcomes because their retirement income comes from different sources. So before moving, this is one area where you want advice based on your actual accounts and income, not somebody else's YouTube comment. Panama is fundamentally different. Panama uses a territorial tax system. In general, Panama taxes income sourced in Panama rather than income sourced outside the country. For an American retiree whose retirement income comes from the United States, that can be a major advantage. But moving overseas does not make your U.S. tax responsibilities disappear. Americans generally remain subject to U.S. tax rules even while living abroad, and foreign account reporting requirements can also apply. So Panama isn't a way to escape the IRS. What it can do is reduce the possibility of adding another country's income tax to certain foreign source retirement income. And for some retirees, that one difference could outweigh almost everything else we've discussed. But there's another practical factor in this comparison that almost never makes the retirement checklists: getting home. For Americans, Panama's proximity to the United States can be a major lifestyle advantage. From Panama City, Miami is about 3 hours and 20 minutes away nonstop. Houston is roughly 4.5 hours, and even Los Angeles is around 7 hours nonstop. Portugal is a different proposition. From Lisbon, New York is roughly 8 hours nonstop. Chicago is about 9.5 hours. Miami is around 9 hours. And Los Angeles is roughly 12.5 hours. For some retirees, that difference won't matter at all. If living in Europe is the goal, a few extra hours on an airplane may be completely irrelevant. But if getting back to the United States quickly matters, whether it's for family, emergencies, holidays, or simply convenience, Panama's proximity is an advantage that's easy to underestimate. And that brings us to the bigger question. What kind of retirement do you actually want? Panama is close. The country uses the dollar. Large established expat communities exist in places such as Boquete and Panama City. And in some areas, an American can function surprisingly well before becoming fluent in Spanish. That can make Panama feel less like cutting ties with the United States and more like moving your life south. Portugal asks something different from you. You're moving to Europe. You're living in a Euro economy. You're entering a different language and culture. But you're also gaining access to something Panama can't reproduce. European life, walkable historic cities, rail connections, easy access to other European countries, a different pace, a different culture, a completely different retirement experience. And Portuguese matters. You can certainly live in parts of Portugal while speaking English, particularly in areas with large international populations. But building a deeper life there becomes easier when you're willing to learn the language. There's another change worth knowing. For years, one of Portugal's biggest selling points was the possibility of applying for citizenship after 5 years of legal residence. That changed in 2026. Under Portugal's revised nationality law, the general naturalization requirement for an American is now 10 years of legal residence, along with additional language, culture, and other requirements. That doesn't eliminate Portugal's long-term appeal, but it does change the calculation for anyone whose plan depended heavily on obtaining an EU passport quickly. And now the real difference between these countries becomes much clearer. If this comparison were only about which country offers the richer cultural experience, I couldn't give you one winner. If it were only about healthcare, Portugal would have an extremely strong case. And if your dream has always been to spend retirement living in Europe, Panama isn't going to replace that dream simply because the numbers work better. But that's not the question we're answering. We're asking which country currently offers the more practical overall retirement option for an American who wants to move abroad without adding unnecessary financial and administrative complexity. And in 2026, I would give that advantage to Panama. Not because Panama is better at everything. It isn't. Panama wins because several of its advantages reinforce each other. Your income arrives in dollars, and you spend dollars. The Pensionado threshold starts at $1,000 a month in qualifying lifetime pension income. The country gives pensioners a residency path specifically designed around retirement. Its territorial tax system can be extremely favorable when your income originates outside Panama. And you're only a relatively short flight from the United States. Portugal still has things Panama cannot match. Its European location, its public healthcare structure, its history, its cities, its transportation, and for the right retiree, those things may be worth the additional complexity. But the Portugal retirement story has changed. Housing in the most popular areas isn't as inexpensive as it once was. The old NHR tax regime isn't available to the typical new retiree. And the path to citizenship for a newly arriving American is longer than it was before the 2026 change. So here's the simplest way I would make the decision. If what you want from retirement abroad is less friction, start by looking at Panama. If what you want is a completely different life and that life specifically means Europe, take a serious look at Portugal. Because the best country isn't necessarily the country that wins the most categories. It's the country whose disadvantages you're actually willing to live with. And that's something a spreadsheet will never decide for you. Your future is portable.